as she noted, I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission here in Boise for a couple of years, and I'm now in the North End Neighborhood Association. One of the reasons why I'm doing that work is that I noted that when I came here, and also just when I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission, there just wasn't a robust amount of knowledge about how to engage the process, and also that the community members, I thought, were having a hard time sort of having their voices heard. So I thought that one of the things that I could do, being an educator, would be to maybe try to up that level and to help people actually find ways that they can participate, and frankly also help the community, the local governments, figure out how to address these issues. Before moving here, I had worked in California, and been a warrior in the development wars for a number of years. And I've seen it work, and I know sort of where the landmines are. And I can tell you that the city of Boise and most of the local governments are headed right to step on every single landmine that there is with regard to growth. So who knows what they're going to do? They will probably continue down the road of just about stepping on every landmine. But if I can, I'd like to help them understand what those are, and also help local community members engage and participate. But before we do that, one of the key things that I've learned over the time is that a lot of this is about listening and understanding, both from the citizen side, but also from the government side, what matters to other people. So here's a little exercise I'm going to force you to endure. I'm going to ask you to talk to the people to your left and your right for 1 minute, and you're going to tell them one thing that upsets you, or either a gripe you have with growth or development here in Boise. Okay?
Construction.
Yeah.
We all
Now,
one way
these need to be specific. Okay? It's got to be specific.
And if you go right first.
Okay. Sure. Okay, hi, I'm Julie. And black.
And then once they're done building, they build houses on the side.
Take it off the top.
And then they might
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know.
All right. Well, this could probably go on for the whole hour. That would make it very easy for me. But here's what I'm going to do. Now, I'm going to ask a couple of you,
That's easy.
not what your gripe was, but to tell me what your neighbor's concern was. Okay? So Tim, I'm going to pick on you first. So what was your neighbor's concern?
The speed with on particular roads that are really neighborhood roads, but you just have people at excessive speed down these roads, and there's not enough infrastructure-y type stuff, sidewalks and things like that, that would not only meter that, but also allow people to, go cross the road, get to bus stops and things like that.
Excellent. Infrastructure stuff. And transportation, traffic.
Traffic,
Yeah, excellent. How about you, sir?
My neighbor here, has had he's only lived here a month, but he's had his mailbox taken out twice. So he wants a speed bump. So a similar issue, actually. Yeah.
It may be that all of Boise's concerns can be resolved in speed bumps.
Yeah.
That's the thing I'm getting at this point. How about you, Bob?
I'm good.
Yeah.
So my neighbor has a problem with traffic, bike lanes, same type of thing, infrastructure.
Excellent. And then,
Well, and she's dealing with a much bigger concern of essentially the city wanting to rezone residential to kind of suit their needs of a growing city, essentially.
how about over here?
We said together for probably, we're new here, so probably the cost to rent. We moved from San Antonio, which is the 7th largest city in the country, and we lived essentially downtown. And it costs the same to live outside of downtown as we paid to live in San Antonio, which is pretty wild.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
Sounds like your landlord's a real jerk.
No, well, if we weren't in the situation we're in, we have a good situation. But if we were not in that situation, it would be bad.
Sounds like there's some insider knowledge over here.
Yes.
Shane,
I
any?
got my friend Erica here. Her one of her big concerns is wildfires, and the concern that, you know, are we properly set up the infrastructure to protect the foothills and certain areas over there. She also put a good plug in for a symposium that might be coming up.
Yeah, what is there anything interesting going on about wildfire? Okay. Oh, by the way, you're being broadcast to the world, just so you should know.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm gonna try to behave myself, and maybe you should too. Well, all right, yeah, so part of this, right, is the difficulty and of kind of understanding not just our own concerns, but the concerns of those that live around us, right? Because one of the issues with growth is that while often smaller cities, you can afford to frankly kind of ignore your neighbor. As cities start to grow, you're forced to actually deal with the fact that your neighbor exists. And you have to start thinking about how you're going to address what those of us in the legal world would call externalities of growth, right? But which ordinary people might just call all the stuff that happens that really annoys me when that new project goes in, right? So what I was asked to do today, or maybe what I volunteered to do today, I can't remember which, was to kind of talk about how you can have your voice heard. And I've been at this for a while now, almost 15 years, doing this from all perspectives. I've been on governmental boards, I've represented developers, I've represented community groups. So what I'm going to try to do today is to walk through some of the things that work over time. And I was asked to give a couple of examples, and I'm going to talk through those. And I'm going to try to not get too deeply into the weeds, because one of the things that can turn people off from dealing with local government is that even though things that happen at the local government level are so important, they are some of the hardest to understand. They're actually remarkably complex in terms of the legal structures. The legal structures often include not just local law, but often state and federal law as well. So there's a lot going on. But that said, there are ways that the community can get involved, and you don't have to worry, you don't have to sweat the details for the most part. Okay, so in your handout are my tried and true tactics for getting your voice heard on growth, or at least have fun trying. Now, I cannot guarantee you that anyone's going to care what you have to say, but I can make sure that you at least get your comments in a way that they get in the record and that people have to deal with them, okay? And I can also tell you a little bit about the community organizing part. And frankly, this works on both sides, whether you're representing developers or if you're representing community groups, the same basic tools apply. So let's run down the main headers here, okay? Because I've kind of buried the boring stuff at the bottom, but it's important to know that it's coming up, so you can read the room when it happens. All right, so the first thing is make it a party, right? People have to want to come, right? It's the number one rule of community organizing. If nobody enjoys being there, you're not going to have any community organizing because it's boring, okay? So if people don't actually care about, people might care about being there, but they have to actually want to come back. Second, you gotta stand for something, not against something. It's a fundamental premise of this that I can just tell you, and there are some people that have been doing this for a while, so feel free to jump in if you want to say something. Third, come once, but more importantly, come again. If you want to get your voice heard, if you just jump in when that project involves you and your neighborhood and that one project that you don't want, most of the time your voice isn't going to be heard that much. If you get involved early, you're going to actually be involved and actually have much more to say. You come once and they're like, you're just a little fly, right? You come again and they're like, this is a political force, right? This person came back. We tried to bore them. We let the meeting last until 12:30 at night. You think I'm kidding, but sometimes they do, right? We put the important stuff at the end and they stayed till the end. I couldn't believe it. And they came back. Social media, right? Very important. Social media, we're going to talk about that in just a second. It's a new era upon us in how this works. You got to learn the rules, right? There's some basic rules of how this thing works. And I see some of my law students in here who there will be a quiz afterwards. And then the last two may actually be the most important. You've got to lobby the city to involve citizens before the only choice is opposition. And that is an unfortunate situation that we're in right now in the Treasure Valley, where the only choice of citizens that want to participate in a project is to oppose the project. And that is a choice of local governments to exclude citizens at every point until the very end. They've done it because they think that it has helped with the growth, but it has also created the landmines that they face now. And frankly, will get some of them voted out of office in coming elections. Which brings me to the next point. Make elections a referendum on community involvement in growth. Do you know that how many people voted for city council members in Boise in the last 2017 election?
10%?
About 10%. There you go. And so Boise's a city of about 250,000.
Wow.
And there were fewer than 15,000 votes total cast. Okay? So if you want to have your voice heard, just vote. I mean, you're going to matter more on those city council votes than on anything else. And it is remarkable. It's remarkable that for people that care as much about growth, are not actually getting out there in these elections and actually participating. Okay, so let's now, I'm done. The rest of it, we're just gonna drink.
I think maybe people just think my vote's not gonna count. I mean, they've gotten beaten down so much that
Yeah.
they see it just going on the development, and they feel their one voice won't make a change.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on. One is that Boise, this is true of a lot of local governments throughout the United States, they hold their elections in off years, so not on the twos, that makes some sense, right? Because you've got all this national stuff and you've got all the state stuff. And one of the ideas has been historically that local government should be apolitical. It shouldn't be associated with national political parties. And I actually happen to believe in that. But the idea is that we want to sort of disassociate those two. The problem is people don't even, it's not even on most people's minds that there's an election in a 2017 or a 2019. And so it's a sort of an ongoing educational process. All right, so let's go back up to the top. Lori's here, who works with Vandal in Boise, and some of these things I'm going to talk about are something that we had worked on with slightly different takes, but Lori, feel free to talk about some of this, of course, Shane in the back is a city attorney in Twin Falls, and so Shane, if you've seen anything, from your experience in Twin, which is also growing rapidly, feel free to pipe in. So one of the things, like I mentioned, is, and I put down here is, these hearings are like watching paint dry while someone simultaneously runs their fingernails down a chalkboard. Okay? And I'm someone that loves this stuff. Okay? But they're boring. Part of the reason why they're boring is that they are bound by due process concerns and other elements of the property rights of the person who is trying to develop the property. Okay? So they're bound in some ways, and they're a little bit stilted. It's hard to have a conversation in these forums. That said, what's going on up there formally, right, and what's happening in the community out here can be two separate things. And effective community organizing is about keeping what's going on, not necessarily at the dais, but what's going on back here, fun. It's about bridging divides, and kind of like what I just asked you to do, right? Not just to think about what your concern is coming in, right? But this is like democracy, right? This is what this stuff is supposed to be about, right? That we go and we're thinking about not just ourselves, but our neighbors, right? We're meeting other people, we're engaging, we're actually thinking about building community, okay? So, how do you build community? Pizza, right? Lori's heard my pizza talk,
Yes.
right?
We got pizza.
And did people like the pizza?
Yes.
People ate all the pizza, didn't they? And in fact, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of the pizza afterwards. So, Lori and I were engaged in, as some of you may know, there was a CVS that was proposed here on State Street. And one of the biggest concerns from the North End Neighborhood Association perspective was that that project was going to essentially demolish an entire city block to create a parking lot in downtown Boise, which we thought was just a really dumb thing to do, to put it bluntly. CVS, it's well known, even though this is being broadcast on Facebook Live. I think it's you can go online and you can find that they are notorious actually for being one of the most aggressive developers in the country.
What is the name of it again?
CVS, the pharmaceutical.
Oh, pharmacy, okay.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So, we knew that we needed to express to the city that people had concerns. And people had a lot of different types of concerns. And they sort of varied in different ways. People had different positions. But the one thing we needed people to do was we needed people to come out and engage in this thing, right? And so we got pizza, right? And we told people there were going to be pizza. And what else did we do? You guys did the march. David Klinger, who's a gentleman here, dressed up like Mr. What, the guy from Monopoly? Mr. Moneybags, is that right?
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah.
Moneybags, yes.
Moneybags.
And marched down Main Street. Okay. Now, I did not dress up like Mr. Moneybags, but the point being, part of this is keeping people engaged, right? And there's a political component, there's a legal component. And there hasn't been a ton of that here at Boise. And that's kind of why I dwell on this, right? You gotta keep it fun. You gotta build community and make people want to keep coming back. Because the meetings are boring if you're just looking at what's going on up here. You gotta actually build something in the community out there that makes those people say, yeah, I'm gonna give up my Tuesday night and stay there all the way until the end, until 12:30, not just once, but time and time. That's really hard to do. But how do you do it? You do it not just because of the issues. That gets people angry. The issues get people angry. But anger doesn't bring people back. What brings people back is fun. Okay? All right. Stand for something, not against something. This may sound kind of silly, but one of the hardest things is people typically get involved in these types of issues when something that they cherish is being challenged, right? And so they start from a premise of opposition. The problem is that opposition seldom sells well, okay? It sounds like you're just trying to protect yourself, right? Which you are, right? The thing is, when you're trying to protect yourself, you're doing it because you believe in something, right? You also have a vision of the way the world is that you're trying to protect. And when you sell your vision, right, it shouldn't just be about, I don't want to do this, I don't want this project, I don't want this thing. It's better to sell a vision of the kind of world that you believe Boise should be. Okay? So it's far less compelling as a commissioner to hear someone say, not in my backyard, than it is to hear someone say, this thing in my backyard, right? This thing I would take. This thing I'm willing to accept. I'm willing to accept that this is the fastest growing city in America, which Boise is. I'm willing to accept that. And here's the thing that I'm willing to accept, right? But it's very hard to sell not in my backyard over time. All right. Again, come once and come again, right? The reality is that most people only come once and they get bored and they're like, and very often, I'd say 80% of the time, that first time you lose. You're not gonna win. You're not gonna win. Why? People are like, who is it? What? Huh? What? Huh? I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get it. You have to create a narrative that you're gonna tell over time, right? That's part of creating that affirmative vision, right? Actually believing in something that you're selling about an idea that you want your place to be, okay? You say it once, and people are like, huh? What? And the commissioners have 8 things, and they're like, their spouse is texting them, and they're like, when are you gonna get home? And they're like, well, we have 7 more agenda items, and it's 10 o'clock, and, you know, it doesn't look good, right? Why do they care at that point, right? But if you keep coming back, you'd be surprised at how few people come back. You'd be surprised at how few people ever coherently look at the documents and actually try to create a vision of the place they want to be. And I can tell you, I sat on that commission for 2 years. I didn't see a single group that came back. And there were some, like the North End Neighborhood Association, which I think maybe came twice in the 2 years that I was there, and that's considered to be one of the most active groups. Okay? So, there you go. All right. Social media is changing a lot of this. In places around the country, local governments are actually using social media as a way to get out ahead of opposition. And one of the things I think we should do is encourage our local governments to start using social media to understand people's concerns and their positive visions for their communities before opposition starts to spring up. Let's figure out what we can all agree upon, right? Social media is a remarkable tool. And if you look here, I've given you 2 letters that I've written. And if you look at the second one, and in the very back several pages, starting on page 18, this is something we tried for the first time ever. The North End Neighborhood Association, we just put up a link on Nextdoor and also on our Facebook page. And we just asked people to give us their comments about this project, about this demolition of a whole city block. And people responded and listed their comments. We had, what was it, Lori, something like 500 or 600 people that submitted comments using social media. This had, as far as I know, this had never been done in Boise before. Okay.
And to be submitted as testimony in the packets that the planning and zoning.
That's right.
I think that was the first time that was ever done, right?
And so what we did was we said in the post, we are going to submit this as testimony. Okay? And so we put this in there, and we had, it was somewhere between, there was some question as to the count. Some people believed it was 500, some people thought it was 800. I don't really know which one it is. Even if you say 500, okay, it was, for Boise, Boise had never seen anything like it. It had never happened in Boise before, to have that many people come out. I have heard some people say that they thought with the initial foothills ordinance that there, in the 90s, that there had been some opposition and support like that. But this shows the power of social media, right? And moreover, it shows that people were willing, there were a lot of people in the North End, in particular, that were willing to actually accept a higher level of development. They were not necessarily opposed to development at the site. They wanted a greater density of development. What they didn't want was for the project to become a parking lot in the middle of downtown Boise. There were actually quite a few people that were willing to accept a CVS with apartments on top, which is something that is a product that CVS builds all over the country. But what they wanted to build was a parking lot with a CVS attached to it.
And a drive-through.
And a drive-through. And that we weren't willing to do. So,
Can I ask a question?
sure.
Do you think it's easier for people to use social media to make a comment than the city's website or other things that just aren't user-friendly?
The city has purposely made it difficult for people to communicate. And I can give you a number of examples. But I have told the city, and when I was on the commission, I tried to convince them to engage in social media outreach, and they did not want to do it. And there is now, at least, there's one person in the department who is not at the top, who is interested in this. So I think there is some legs to it. There are a number of products out there that are actually excellent that Salt Lake City use. There are products out there to manage this and to make it really easy for people to communicate up front. And for cities, it's just a no-brainer. Just put this stuff out there and get the feedback, and then work towards a project that everyone can agree on. We know the projects that are going to be controversial for the most part, you know.
Yeah.
And any developer that has worked in a more urban area knows exactly how this works. They know where the landmines are. And we saw it actually when Moshe Safdie came here, right? What was the first thing, right? Legendary architect is going to work on the library. What's the first thing he did? Engage the community, right? Now, there were a few missteps in that. The people are upset about the cabin, right? And what's going to happen there. But as far as, if you think about it from a developer perspective, he's doing it exactly right. He's reaching out, he's having all these conversations with people, and he's willing to engage them on those things and on their terms, not just try to run over it. Because otherwise, there's two things that tend to happen. One, either there's political blowback and those politicians lose their seats, or it otherwise stymies development. That person gets their project through, but the next 10 developers then can't get their projects through. So if you're thinking about how you maintain a fast growth environment as there become more and more projects down the road, there's no way that just ramming projects through at the pace that they are right now is ever going to work in the long run. All right. Now we come to the part you've all been dreading, at least my students. The rules. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the rules, okay? And so this, starting on page 1, is something, how to engage on a specific project, okay? And there, this is something that, in the North End Neighborhood Association, we get requests every day about opposing residential demolitions. And we made a policy decision at NENA that we just aren't, we don't do single-family residential oppositions. We just don't do it. But people wanted to know how to engage, and so I put together this little pamphlet. But it's basically the same thing for anything, okay? I mean, it's the same basic tools. So begin organizing immediately, right? One of the things that happens in Boise that is problematic is that they hide the applications, okay? It is, the city only lets you know of a project application that you can only, basically, even though there's a database, you have to know the exact permit number to type in to find out what's been filed. So you can't go and canvass and see what are the permits that have been filed within the last month, okay? Notice, they've been shrinking the notices, and they've been wanting to shrink the notice fields even smaller. They have been, yeah.
Well, so we're on a committee with the city right now, and because we wrote them a letter asking for more citizen involvement in these processes. And so one of the things that we have accomplished is they've actually increased the notification radius to 500 feet in this 6-month trial period. So that's a good thing.
Good.
So this is a postcard that people get mailed if they're within 500. It used to be 300 feet, and now it's expanded to 500 feet.
500 feet.
We were advocating for 7. They wanted 5. We were overruled. So
Yeah.
it's a 500, which is 200 feet more than what the LUPA says right now. So that's an improvement.
Although keeping in mind that how that came to be that they actually engaged in that committee is that they had a request they had actually proposed regulations to reduce it to 150 feet.
Right.
And somebody, I'm not going to say who,
Yes.
opposed it,
Objective.
right?
Yes.
And we made a big political stink.
Yeah.
And in fact, they were going to eliminate notice for a variety of different projects. And other projects, they were going to make administrative approvals so that you wouldn't even know that it happened. Someone would just go in to get the permit, and they would just approve it, and there would be no notice provided.
And you got that all turned over? You got
Well,
that
we
all-
got them to stop. They'll probably come back.
Okay,
In
because
some
I remember
capacity.
hearing about all that.
This is just for downtown.
Yeah.
Did they tie that on with affordable housing so they could get this high density?
They tied it on, they actually tied it on with the accessory dwelling units.
Okay.
And we actually told them there was a provision that was going to up the size of accessory dwelling units. And what we said was that we would actually accept the increased size of accessory dwelling units, and we actually wanted them to do that. And we were totally open to that, right? Allowing for increased density, right? Making larger essentially making larger units that would be more livable, going from 600 to 700 square feet. And we were willing to accept that. What we didn't want was all this other reduction in process.
Yeah.
And what you've been seeing in the city is they've been trying to use administrative permits for ever larger projects. In the East End, the bike park, they tried to use an administrative permit for the bike park, which means that there was no notice provided. They tried to use it for St. Luke's, for the road, the way they were going to reconfigure the road, which is one of the largest traffic issues in the city. Now, these are all things that we can work through. But the point is, if you put these into the administrative process, no one gets to engage. And it really is something that you wake up tomorrow and suddenly a building is gone. Or a street crew has decided that they're going to be jackhammering outside your front door. So, again, these are things that really get people upset. This problem about growth that's happening in Boise is of the city's own devise. They have created the problem, right? And what we're doing is forcefully helping them correct it. All right, so how can you become someone that does this by night? All right.
Or by day, maybe.
Or by day, yeah. So, I kind of lay out out a bunch of things, but I just want to mention a couple of things, because one is that there's, when Boise sends out its cards telling you there's a project going on, it will say, we cordially invite you to come and give 3 minutes of testimony at this hearing, okay? Now, I'm a law professor. I can barely say my name in 3 minutes, okay? I have a very hard time keeping down the chatter. So part of my problem is that I can't say anything meaningful in 3 minutes, okay? And actually, really nobody can. And that's kind of the point. Now, what they don't tell you is that you can also file a written letter, which is what all of the developers are doing, and what any sophisticated player is doing, okay? But there's a catch. Guess what? You can't just bring your letter to that hearing. You have to submit it the Thursday prior by 5 p.m. Okay? And if you don't, you can beg down before go on your knees before the Planning Commission, and they are now taking a relatively strong hand and saying no. Okay? So again, another way, this rule is new. This rule's only been there for a couple of years. But again, it's another way of trying to make it hard for the community to actually participate. Now, I give some details about how you actually engage the planner, and some details about salutations, etc. All right. Now, Later on, and you can look at this and, you know, it's all very fast. But, okay, now I want you to skip over here to this letter, okay? This is the letter the initial letter we wrote about CDS. This letter actually, with all of its attachments, was 67 pages. So, when you're writing a letter, right, it's always best to like have lots of attachments at the end and make it like enormous, right? Which sounds kind of silly, but it's actually true, right? Okay, so first thing you notice is that we had a coalition, right? We talked with our friends. We met with our friends, and we listened to them. And we came together on something that 5 neighborhood associations could agree upon, okay? And we went back and forth, right? And we actually engaged and listened to what our neighbors had to say, okay? This letter is a collection of those ideas. It's not necessarily the letter that if I were to write this letter all by myself, that I would have written, but it expresses the ideas that people could agree upon. So that's one thing that I think is really important. I can't tell you, I don't think I ever saw when I was on the commission 5 neighborhood associations ever get together on anything, okay? So getting together, pairing with your other neighborhood associations can be a real really powerful thing.
They don't want you to. In April, I went to my first attendance. It's quarterly. It's the neighborhood associations meeting as neighborhood associations, and the concept came up of, can we create like an email that goes out to every neighborhood so you can inform each other of what's going on in your neighborhood. Squashed it. No, that's not what this is about. They don't want you to join together.
Yeah, well, who cares what they want?
Yeah, I know.
Right? Then you're right? That's been a problem. And in fact, much of Boise actually has not even had a neighborhood association associated with it until recently. There's been some large ones that have been recently created, but they're still nascent. So if you are interested in being involved in your community, one of the things you can do is get involved with Boise's neighborhood associations. Now, unlike Portland or Seattle, Boise's neighborhood associations are not arms of the city. I'm on NINA. We're a 501c4. We're a C4 because we engage in political activity, and we also run a street fair. We were primarily funded by beer.
Independence.
Yes, beer funds our independence. But I say that somewhat facetiously, but it's actually true. Most of the street fair makes no money, it actually loses money, but the beer vendor gives us a deal, and we make most of our money for off the beer. So there you go. Should have added beer, right? I should have done the first one, right? And or some other community-related thing like such as that.
Everyone likes to get beer.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Charge for beer.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. There was actually a community meeting about whether we should raise the price of beer. And we decided that no, we thought that it was an important part of people's community engagement. So. Anyway, so let me just walk you through a couple of the details here. So if you turn onto page 3, so you'll see that if you want the fancy version, right? This is the catalog, right? Okay, you got your lawyer standard of review stuff here, right? And now we're gonna go and we're gonna talk about the conditional use permit, and we're gonna talk about each of these prongs. So a conditional use permit is, and any of these permits that are issued have elements, okay? And all the law students are shuddering, right? Okay, right? But, right, that's what it is. They're elements, they're created by state statute, and, how am I doing on time? Okay.
10 more minutes.
Yeah. Don't want to eat up too much of Facebook's bandwidth. Okay, so there are elements here, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to make an argument on each of these elements. They're created by state statute, and for the permit to be issued, each of these elements has to be satisfied. In reality, the permit, the one that matters the most, is the one that requires that the proposed use is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Okay? And this is where the discretion comes in. It's a discretionary permit. Okay? And let me just tell you what that. Here's what that means in the abstract. I mean, taking it from the abstract down to just. Yeah. Okay. It basically means this. It's discretionary. There's stuff in the comp plan. Okay? It's like 300 pages long. Okay? And you can use those tools, those elements in the comp plan, to justify giving the permit or denying the permit. Okay? It's discretionary. And as long as you make findings, you can, as long as the commission makes findings, right, they can approve it or deny it without violating due process. Okay? They just have to justify what it is that they're doing with regard to the comp plan. So what you're going to do is to make an argument with regard to certain elements of the comp plan that you believe would justify approval or denial, right? Because Boise has forced people into only participating in the context of opposition, you're almost always in a position of opposition if you want to engage in the city of Boise at this time. Hopefully that will change. And hopefully down the road, the community will actually be able to engage in helping to write that comp plan, that comprehensive plan, which is supposed to be the visionary document for the city's future, and actually playing a more proactive role in what the city becomes. So that's going to be the nature of your argument, right? You're going to then, sometimes there are multiple permits. And when there are multiple permits, you're going to make the argument for each of those permits, right? I mean, if you're in opposition, then you're going to be making reasons, stating reasons as to why you believe it should not be granted. All right. So the other key thing that I want to convey is that you're going to write this letter. You're going to get it in by the Thursday prior, right? If you write something like, if you write a little nastygram like this, right? What often happens is, it's not just opposition, it's an invitation to deal, okay? And your real goal is not just to, if you're a repeat player, right? Your best thing to do is not, you write the nastygram, which says, I'm going to oppose your project, but I'm willing to have a conversation with you. And that really is what you're trying to do. You're really trying, for the most part, to have a conversation. This is the bludgeon, right? I can come and knock you on the head and destroy your project. But I don't want to do that because I'm a reasonable person, right? And if you're willing to deal with me, I'm willing to deal with you. That is the nature of the conversation. And moreover, that's why citizens need to be engaged. Because it's very hard for cities, as the regulators, to actually have that conversation. Okay? It implicates all kinds of constitutional issues for cities. But if community groups are doing it, and community groups are leading that charge, they can have that conversation without any concern about the constitutional considerations. The process works best if you don't just have that the regulatory agency making all the decisions, but if you have a variety of different parties that are at the table, okay? Because different parties can do different things, and that creates a good conversation. A good developer will engage this community early on. And for large projects, you see them do it, right? I gave the example of Moshe Safdie. I think that you will see that hopefully more in Boise as people begin to have projects denied and as you begin to see more of the backlash. Finally, going back to the lobbying the city to involve citizens before the only choice is opposition, is really, I think, the biggest point that I have to make here. It's terrible if citizens' only way to engage is to oppose a project, okay? We opposed St. Luke's administrative permit for their road project. And I talked to their communications manager, who I've known for a long time, and she asked us, well, why did you oppose this? And I said, well, we oppose this because the city is increasingly using these administrative permits on larger and larger projects. There's no other way for us to engage with that, right? There's no other way for us to engage you other than in opposition to this permit. We don't want to do that.
Can you define that? Because I'm still a little confused.
With an administrative